The old survey drone had been floating in the dark for 300 years before anyone opened its files again. It belonged to the Kaldrinic Empire, a vast government that ruled over thousands of star systems, and it had been sent out long ago to map the edges of known space. Nobody in the Empire cared much about old drones anymore. They cared about numbers, and the numbers said Sector 447 was empty. A tired clerk named Solmar Dek pulled up the report one afternoon while sitting in a small office on a mining station near the edge of Empire space. He was not important. He processed papers all day, checking boxes, filing reports, and dreaming about a bigger job somewhere closer to the capital. The report on his screen said Sector 447 contained no sapient life, no advanced technology, and nothing worth protecting. It was full of asteroids, a few dead moons, and one small yellow star with some rocky planets around it. Perfect for mining. He stamped it as approved and sent it up the chain, never once imagining that anyone might be living there. He was wrong. Deep inside that sector, hidden behind fields of tumbling rock and old comet debris, was a planet called Earth. It looked ordinary from a distance, blue and green and quiet, the kind of world a survey drone would glance at and dismiss. But for the past 200 years, the people of Earth had worked very hard to look uninteresting. Every radio signal that could leak into space was filtered and hidden. Every large structure in orbit was disguised to look like drifting rock. Every ship leaving the system slipped out quietly, using technology built specifically to avoid notice. Humanity had learned, the hard way, that being noticed by the wrong people could mean the end of everything. The story of why went back further than most people now living could remember. Long ago, before anyone had heard of the Kaldrinic Empire, humanity had a brief and terrible encounter with wreckage from another species entirely. It was not a friendly meeting. A damaged alien warship had drifted into the outer solar system, its systems still partly active, its weapons still hungry. The fight to destroy it had cost human lives and had taught a hard lesson. The universe was not a safe place, and anyone who found Earth might not come in peace. After that, a new kind of thinking took hold. Instead of racing to build the biggest fleet or shout into space announcing their presence, humanity chose to disappear. Scientists and engineers built stealth systems that could bend and scatter light and radio waves. Governments merged their space programs into a single quiet effort. A new office was created, one whose entire job was to make sure Earth stayed off every star chart drawn by anyone else. That office was run by a calm and careful man named Daniel Reyes. Daniel did not look like someone in charge of a planet's survival. He wore simple clothes, drank plain coffee, and preferred to work from a small control room rather than a grand office. But he had spent his whole career studying every scrap of information humanity could gather about other civilizations, learning their habits, their weaknesses, and their appetite for conquest. He believed, deeply, that hiding was not weakness. It was patience. Someday, he often said, humanity would decide when to be found. Not before. For 200 years, his plan worked perfectly. Every survey ship that passed near the sector saw nothing worth reporting. Every scan came back empty. The Empire's own records confirmed it, over and over, that Sector 447 held nothing of value. Daniel's office quietly celebrated each year that passed without incident, treating it like a small victory in an unseen war. But nothing lasts forever. Far away, near the heart of Kaldrinic space, a mining company called the Vantis Combine was looking for new territory to exploit. Their resources were running low, and their leaders were hungry for fresh asteroid fields to strip for metal and fuel. Someone in their planning office found the old survey report on Sector 447, the one Solmar Dek had approved without a second thought. It looked ideal, empty, rich in minerals, and completely unclaimed. Within weeks, a mining ship called the Vantis Combine's flagship vessel was prepared for departure. Its crew was ordinary, mostly workers looking for a paycheck, led by a stiff and rule-following captain who wanted nothing more than a clean, uneventful mission. He had no idea that his ship was about to drift into a sector that was anything but empty. On Earth, alarms did not sound yet. Daniel Reyes was reviewing routine reports when a message came in from a hidden monitoring post near the edge of the sector. A ship had entered. Not a scout, not a stray vessel passing through. A mining ship, moving with purpose, heading straight for one of the asteroid fields that hid a human listening station. Daniel read the message twice, then set down his coffee cup slowly. 200 years of careful silence were about to be tested. He picked up a secure line and called for Laura Bennett, the officer in charge of the nearest patrol ship, and told her simply that something had entered the sector and that she needed to watch it closely. He did not yet know if this was the beginning of an accident or the beginning of the end of everything humanity had worked to protect. Far above the quiet blue planet, the Vantis Combine's mining ship drifted closer to the asteroid field, its drones already warming up, ready to begin cutting into rock that was never meant to be touched. Laura Bennett had learned long ago that waiting was the hardest part of her job. She commanded a small patrol ship called the Quiet Steppe, a vessel built for one purpose only: to watch and not be seen. Her crew was small, trained for years to sit still, track movement, and report back without ever engaging. That was the rule. Watch, but do not touch. For years, she had followed that rule without complaint. Tonight, that rule was about to break. The Vantis Combine's mining ship had settled into position near a cluster of asteroids, the same cluster that hid one of humanity's oldest listening posts. The post looked like nothing more than a chunk of drifting rock, its surface covered in real stone and dust to fool any scanner. Inside, it held sensitive equipment that had monitored deep space for decades. If the mining drones started cutting into that rock, they would find wires, metal, and machinery where there should have been nothing but stone. Laura watched the drones detach from the mining ship and begin drifting toward the asteroid. Her sensor operator, a quiet young man who rarely spoke unless necessary, read out the numbers in a flat voice. Drones approaching. Cutting beams active. Target locked on the listening post's outer shell. Laura felt her stomach tighten. If those drones cut through, the post would be exposed, and with it, proof that Sector 447 was anything but empty. She had seconds to decide. Protocol said to retreat, to protect the secret at all costs, even if it meant losing the post. But losing the post meant losing years of data, and worse, it might not stop the drones from digging deeper and finding something even more revealing underneath. Laura made her choice quickly. She ordered her ship to decloak just long enough to intercept the drones, using short bursts of directed energy to knock them off course without destroying them. It was risky. It would reveal her ship's location, if only for a moment. But it was better than the alternative. The Quiet Steppe flickered into view for the first time in the ship's operational history, right in front of the startled sensors of the mining vessel. The drones spun away, harmlessly deflected, tumbling into empty space. On the mining ship's bridge, alarms blared. The rigid, rule-following captain nearly dropped his cup of tea when the reports came in. An unknown vessel, technology not matching any known Empire design, had appeared out of nowhere and disabled his equipment without firing a single hostile shot. Panic spread through the crew quickly. They had been told the sector was empty. Now, an unknown ship with technology capable of hiding itself entirely from sensors had just proven that assumption wrong in the most dramatic way possible. The captain, whose name was recorded in the ship's log simply as Captain Deck, tried to remain calm as he ordered his crew to pull back the remaining drones and hold position. He was more afraid of what his superiors would say than of the mysterious ship itself. An empty sector that was not empty meant someone, somewhere, had made a very serious mistake. And mistakes in the Empire's chain of command rarely stayed contained to the person who made them. Laura's ship cloaked again almost as quickly as it had appeared, but the damage, in terms of secrecy, was already done. She contacted Daniel Reyes immediately, describing exactly what had happened. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable even over the secure video link. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He told her she had made the right call. Losing the listening post would have cost them more than a brief reveal ever could. But he also knew what this meant. The 200 years of careful hiding had just cracked, even if only slightly. It was only a matter of time before the mining ship's report reached someone with the authority to send more ships to investigate. He was right. Aboard the mining vessel, Captain Deck sent an urgent message back through the Empire's communication relays, describing the unknown technology and the impossible appearance of a hostile-capable ship in a sector officially listed as empty. His message traveled quickly through the chain of command, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By the time it reached the desk of a senior fleet commander named Iron Vosk, it had become a report of a possible new spacefaring civilization with advanced stealth technology, hiding in a sector the Empire had claimed for over 3 centuries. Vosk read the report twice. He had handled dozens of first-contact situations before, and most of them followed the same pattern. A primitive species discovered, awed by Empire technology, eventually brought into the fold as a minor, cooperative member state. But something about this report felt different. A ship appearing and disappearing without a trace was not the behavior of a primitive species. It was the behavior of someone who had been hiding on purpose and doing it very well. He ordered a proper contact fleet assembled, larger than usual, just in case. Word of the discovery spread quickly through certain circles of the Empire's military command, some excited by the potential for a new resource-rich territory, others quietly nervous about what kind of species could remain hidden from Empire surveys for centuries without being detected even once. On Earth, Daniel Reyes gathered his closest advisors for an emergency meeting. The plan they had built and protected for 200 years was no longer guaranteed to hold. Somewhere out among the stars, a fleet was preparing to come looking for answers, and Earth would have to decide, for the first time in generations, how much of itself it was willing to show the universe. Fleet Commander Iron Vosk had a habit of tapping his fingers on the armrest of his command chair whenever he was thinking. He was doing it now, watching the sensor readouts as his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 447. He had led first-contact missions before, more than a dozen of them across his long career, and each one had followed a familiar shape. A less advanced species would be found, usually frightened, usually eager to please a power as old and strong as the Kaldrinic Empire. He expected this to be much the same, despite the strange report about a vanishing ship. His fleet was larger than a normal contact mission required, 6 warships instead of the usual 2 or 3, a decision he had made mostly to calm his own nerves rather than out of any real belief that a serious threat existed. Still, he had ordered his crews to stay alert. Something about the mining captain's panicked message had stuck with him, though he would never admit it made him nervous. On Earth, the response to the incoming fleet was calm on the surface but tense underneath. Daniel Reyes and his team had spent days preparing, not for war, but for conversation. They chose their delegation carefully. Daniel would speak for Earth's government, and Laura Bennett, still shaken from her encounter with the mining ship, would represent Earth's defense forces. Neither of them planned to reveal more than necessary. The plan was simple: acknowledge humanity's existence, but say nothing about population numbers, home planet location, or true military strength. The meeting took place aboard Vosk's flagship, a massive vessel filled with polished metal corridors and rooms designed to impress visitors from lesser civilizations. Daniel and Laura arrived aboard a small human shuttle, deliberately unremarkable in design, giving away nothing about the technology humanity actually possessed. Vosk greeted them in a large meeting hall, flanked by advisors and a translator device that struggled slightly with human speech patterns before adjusting. Vosk began the conversation the way he always did, with a mixture of formal politeness and quiet superiority. He welcomed them to the wider community of civilized species, explained the benefits of joining the Empire's protection, and asked, almost casually, for basic information about their homeworld and population. Daniel answered every question with careful, polite vagueness. He confirmed humanity existed, confirmed they were capable of space travel, and confirmed nothing else. When pressed about numbers, he simply said that such information was not something Earth was ready to share with a species they had just met. Vosk found this strange. Most species he had contacted before answered such questions eagerly, hoping cooperation would earn them better treatment. Humanity's calm refusal did not fit the pattern. He decided it was likely a bluff, a way of appearing stronger than they actually were, a common enough trick among frightened species trying to protect themselves. He smiled thinly and moved the conversation along, but made a private note to learn more through other means. A junior officer among Vosk's staff, eager to prove himself, suggested a demonstration of Empire strength might help clarify the balance of power for the humans. Vosk, more out of habit than deep thought, approved a flyover of one of humanity's colony worlds, a small formation of ships meant to fly close enough to intimidate without technically threatening anyone. It was a common tactic, one that usually left newly contacted species deeply impressed and slightly afraid. The formation of 6 Caldrinic ships approached the human colony world quietly, expecting no resistance at all. Within seconds of entering the colony's outer defense range, every single ship found itself locked onto by targeting systems more precise than anything in the Empire's own arsenal. Weapons did not fire. No threats were made, but the message was unmistakable. The colony's automated defenses had identified, tracked, and could have destroyed the entire formation in the time it took the ships to simply pass by. Reports of the incident reached Vosk within minutes, and for the first time since arriving in the sector, his confident expression faltered. A newly discovered species should not have defense systems capable of instantly targeting an unfamiliar fleet with that level of precision. Either their intelligence reports were dangerously wrong, or humanity had been hiding far more capability than anyone had guessed. Back in the meeting hall, Daniel noticed the subtle change in Vosk's posture the moment the reports came through. He said nothing about it, choosing instead to continue the conversation as though nothing unusual had happened. Laura, standing quietly beside him, allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. The message had been sent, without a single shot fired, without a single threat spoken aloud. Vosk ended the meeting shortly after, promising to continue talks the following day, but his mind was elsewhere. He requested additional ships be sent to the sector, framing it publicly as a standard precaution for a newly discovered territory. Privately, he ordered something else entirely. A small, undetectable probe ship, designed to slip away from the fleet and search quietly for the true location of humanity's homeworld. If Earth would not share its secrets willingly, he decided, the Empire would simply find them another way. The probe launched under cover of a routine supply run, its departure hidden among the normal traffic of Vosk's growing fleet. Nobody aboard the flagship expected it to be noticed at all. Vosk leaned back in his chair afterward, tapping his fingers once again, and allowed himself to believe, for the moment, that he was still fully in control of the situation. The probe never got far. It left Vosk's fleet quietly, drifting away under the cover of a supply ship's normal flight path, its systems designed to avoid detection by anything the Empire itself considered standard sensor technology. What its designers had not accounted for was that humanity's detection network did not work the way Empire engineers assumed it would. Hidden sensor arrays scattered across the outer edges of the sector picked up the probe within hours of its departure, tracking its quiet, careful path toward the inner system where Earth waited. A small, unmanned defense drone intercepted the probe before it came anywhere close to the planet, disabling it cleanly and pulling its remains back to a hidden facility for study. The entire operation took less than a day, and Vosk's fleet never received any signal back from their probe at all. It simply vanished, as though it had never existed. Daniel Reyes learned about the probe within hours of its launch, long before it was even destroyed. Every unusual movement near Vosk's fleet was being tracked carefully by Earth's own quiet network of listening posts and hidden sensors, a system built over 2 centuries specifically to prevent exactly this kind of situation from happening unnoticed. When he confirmed the probe had been heading straight for Earth's home system, his careful, patient expression finally cracked into something closer to anger. He requested an emergency meeting with Vosk the following morning, arriving aboard the same unremarkable shuttle as before, though his mood was very different this time. Laura Bennett accompanied him again, standing quietly at his side as he faced Vosk across the same polished meeting hall. Daniel did not waste time with polite formalities. He told Vosk plainly that Earth was aware of the probe, aware of its destination, and aware that it had been launched in secret during what were supposed to be good-faith negotiations. Vosk, caught completely off guard, tried at first to deny any knowledge of the probe, but Daniel simply placed a small device on the table between them and played back a recording of the probe's exact launch time, flight path, and eventual destruction, all captured by Earth's own systems without a single gap in the data. The room fell silent. Vosk's advisors exchanged uneasy glances. There was no room left for denial. Daniel spoke carefully, choosing his words with the same patience that had guided humanity's entire strategy for 200 years. He explained that Earth understood curiosity and even understood caution, but secret action taken during open negotiations was a betrayal of trust that could not be ignored. He made it clear that Earth had chosen restraint in destroying the probe quietly rather than treating it as an act of war, but that restraint should not be mistaken for weakness or blind trust. Vosk, to his credit, did not try to argue further. He apologized, somewhat stiffly, acknowledging that the probe had been his decision and his alone. Whatever confidence he had carried into the sector was clearly shaken. He began to understand that humanity was not simply a newly discovered species stumbling through first contact. They were a civilization that had been watching, preparing, and thinking several steps ahead the entire time. Daniel decided the moment called for something more than words. He authorized a small, carefully chosen reveal, not of Earth's homeworld or its full military strength, but of a limited historical archive. The file he shared showed fragments of humanity's early history in space, including the brutal encounter with hostile alien wreckage that had first taught humanity the value of caution. It showed the scars of that conflict, the losses suffered, and the reasoning that led an entire civilization to choose silence over expansion for 2 centuries. Among Vosk's staff sat a younger diplomat named Talia Sorn, someone who had joined the mission hoping for genuine understanding between species rather than simple conquest or trade agreements. She watched the archive with quiet fascination, seeing not a primitive society hiding out of fear, but a civilization that had made a deliberate, disciplined choice to protect itself by disappearing entirely from the notice of stronger powers. It was, she realized, a strategy the Empire itself might have used if their own history had gone differently. Talia spoke up during the meeting, something junior diplomats rarely did in Vosk's presence. She suggested that perhaps humanity's caution was not an insult to the Empire, but a lesson in patience that the Empire itself could learn from. Vosk did not respond immediately, but he did not dismiss the idea either. For the first time since arriving in the sector, he seemed genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. The meeting ended with a fragile, uneasy sense of progress. Daniel and Laura returned to their shuttle, aware that trust between the 2 civilizations remained thin, but no longer completely absent. Vosk, left alone in his quarters that night, drafted a long and carefully worded report back to the Empire's central government, describing everything that had happened, including the probe's failure and the unsettling archive humanity had shared. He hoped, quietly, that his report would be read with caution and patience. Instead, it was read by officials far more concerned with the embarrassment of a centuries-old survey error than with any lesson about restraint. Within days, orders came back from the Empire's capital, orders that had nothing to do with careful diplomacy at all. A full battle fleet, commanded by a hardline admiral with little patience for uncertainty, was being dispatched to Sector 447 to settle the matter once and for all. Admiral Corin Aldith had built his entire career on decisiveness. He did not believe in long negotiations, careful patience, or waiting to see how a situation might unfold on its own. When he received orders to take a full battle fleet into Sector 447, he read them once, nodded to himself, and began planning the fastest, most direct approach possible. As far as he was concerned, an intelligence failure of this size, a species hidden for centuries inside Empire territory, demanded a swift and forceful correction, not more careful conversation. His fleet arrived at the edge of the sector 3 weeks later, 20 warships strong, far larger than anything Vosk had brought. Aldith considered Vosk's earlier reports interesting but ultimately soft, the kind of cautious thinking that came from career diplomats who had spent too much time worrying about hurt feelings instead of results. He intended to demonstrate Empire strength clearly enough that any further negotiation would happen entirely on Empire terms. Word of the approaching fleet reached Daniel Reyes almost immediately, relayed through the same quiet network of hidden sensors that had tracked every other Empire movement in the sector. He gathered his advisors once again, though this time the mood in the room was heavier than before. A battle fleet was a very different thing from a contact fleet. Diplomacy, for the moment, seemed to have run its course. Laura Bennett, still leading patrol operations near the sector's edge, watched Aldith's fleet spread out in a wide formation as it entered human territory. Unlike Vosk's earlier arrival, there was no attempt at polite introduction. Aldith's ships moved with clear purpose, scanning aggressively, clearly searching for something to target or intimidate. Laura reported the details back to Daniel calmly, though even her steady voice carried a note of tension. Daniel considered the situation carefully. A show of force in return would likely only escalate matters further, confirming Aldith's belief that humanity was a threat worth crushing quickly. But complete passivity risked looking like weakness, inviting an even more aggressive response. He decided on something different entirely, a strategy built not around confrontation, but around demonstration. He gave the order that had been prepared, quietly, for exactly this kind of moment. Every human vessel, station, and colony within the sector activated its full stealth systems simultaneously. Within minutes, every trace of human activity vanished from Aldith's sensors. Ships that had been visible moments before disappeared entirely. Colony worlds that had shown clear signs of habitation suddenly read as empty, lifeless rock. To Aldith's instruments, the sector looked exactly like the survey report from centuries ago had claimed. Truly, completely empty. Aldith stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at sensor readings that showed nothing at all, and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: doubt. His fleet had entered a sector supposedly hiding an advanced, hostile civilization, and now that civilization had simply vanished without a trace, as though it had never existed. He ordered wider scans, deeper searches, more aggressive sensor sweeps. Nothing changed. The sector remained silent and empty in every reading his ships could produce. For nearly a full day, Aldith's fleet drifted through Sector 447, searching for any sign of the species that had caused so much concern back at the Empire's capital. His officers grew increasingly uneasy, some beginning to wonder if the entire situation had been some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. Aldith himself began drafting a report suggesting the earlier incidents might have been exaggerated, a mistake that could be quietly corrected without further embarrassment. Then, without warning, human ships began appearing directly alongside his fleet, decloaking simultaneously across his entire formation. They did not appear at a distance, ready to strike from afar. They appeared close, engines powered down, weapons systems visibly inactive, positioned with a precision that could only come from ships that had been tracking Aldith's fleet closely the entire time, matching its every movement while remaining completely undetected. The message was unmistakable, and it did not need to be spoken aloud. Humanity had not been hiding out of weakness or fear during the fleet's search. They had been watching, calmly and patiently, capable of striking at any moment they chose, and had simply chosen not to. Every ship in Aldith's fleet now sat within striking range of a human vessel that had shadowed it undetected for hours, perhaps longer. Aldith stared at the readouts in stunned silence. He had commanded battle fleets for decades, faced down hostile species in open warfare, and prided himself on never being caught off guard. Now he understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that his entire fleet had been at humanity's mercy the moment it entered the sector, and none of his officers had noticed a single sign of it until humanity decided to reveal itself. He gave the order to stand down, his voice quieter than usual, and requested emergency contact with Earth's representatives. Word of the encounter spread quickly through his fleet, and through the return channels back to Vosk's smaller diplomatic contingent still stationed nearby. Vosk, upon hearing the report, felt a strange mixture of vindication and unease. He had suspected humanity was far more capable than their calm, careful behavior suggested. Now there was no doubt left at all. Talia Sorn, present for the exchange of messages between fleets, saw an opportunity in the tense silence that followed. She argued, quietly but firmly, to anyone who would listen, that this was the moment for genuine peace, not another forced negotiation built on fear and posturing. Humanity had proven, without firing a single shot, that it held every advantage in this encounter. The only path forward that made any sense now was one built on mutual respect, rather than an attempt to force submission that would clearly fail. Word of Admiral Aldith's failed show of force traveled quickly through both fleets, and by the time formal talks were arranged, the mood on both sides had shifted completely. Nobody in Sector 447 still believed humanity was a primitive species waiting to be absorbed into the Empire. The only question left was what kind of relationship the two civilizations could build, now that the balance of power had been made painfully clear. Daniel Reyes chose the location for the final round of negotiations carefully. Instead of meeting aboard one of the massive Kaldrinic warships, as tradition might have suggested, he invited the Empire's representatives to a modest human space station, small, practical, and without any of the polished grandeur the Empire usually favored for such occasions. It was a quiet message in itself. Earth was not interested in impressing anyone, nor in being impressed. It wanted a conversation between equals, and the setting reflected that from the very beginning. Vosk arrived first, along with Talia Sorn, both of them noticeably calmer than during their earlier visits. Admiral Aldith arrived shortly after, his usual confidence replaced by a careful, measured caution that had not been present when he first entered the sector. Laura Bennett stood beside Daniel as the talks began, her presence a quiet reminder of the discipline and restraint humanity had shown throughout the entire encounter. The negotiations themselves moved more smoothly than anyone might have expected after such a tense beginning. Aldith, still shaken by his experience drifting blind through what should have been hostile territory, pushed for a formal treaty rather than further confrontation. Vosk, having watched humanity's calm handling of every provocation from the very first meeting, supported the idea strongly. Talia, given a more prominent voice in the discussions than junior diplomats usually received, helped shape the language of the agreement itself, careful to avoid anything that sounded like the usual terms the Empire offered to species it considered lesser. Daniel laid out Earth's position clearly and without unnecessary drama. Humanity was not interested in joining the Empire as a subject territory, nor did it wish to become an enemy locked in endless conflict. What it wanted was simple recognition that Sector 447 belonged to humanity, protected by treaty rather than claimed by survey error, and that any future contact between the two civilizations would happen through mutual agreement, not unilateral decisions made by mining companies or overconfident fleet commanders. The talks continued for several days, covering trade boundaries, communication protocols, and clear rules about which parts of human territory remained off-limits to Empire vessels entirely. Every point was negotiated carefully, with neither side rushing toward an agreement neither fully understood. By the end, a treaty existed that satisfied both sides reasonably well, recognizing Sector 447 as sovereign human territory while opening limited, carefully controlled channels for future contact and trade. Back at the Empire's capital, the news was received with mixed feelings. Officials were embarrassed by the scale of the original survey error, a mistake that had gone unnoticed for over 3 centuries despite the Empire's reputation for thorough, careful mapping of its territory. At the same time, few among the leadership wanted the full story to spread widely. A hidden civilization capable of tracking an entire battle fleet undetected was not the kind of news that made the Empire look strong. The treaty was quietly ratified, without the fanfare that usually accompanied new agreements, in the hope that the matter would fade quietly from memory. It did not fade quietly at all. Word of what had happened in Sector 447 spread slowly at first, through traders, through minor officials who had heard fragments of the story, and eventually through other species who had long lived under the assumption that the Kaldrinic Empire's surveys were flawless and complete. If an entire inhabited system could remain hidden for centuries without detection, people began to ask, what else might the Empire have missed? The question spread further than anyone in the Empire's capital would have liked. Solmar Dek, the same rigid mining captain who had first stumbled onto the mystery of Sector 447, found himself reassigned shortly after the treaty was signed, given a quieter post far from the attention his discovery had brought him. He never fully understood how close his simple mining expedition had come to sparking a conflict far larger than anyone back at his old desk job could have imagined. On Earth, life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though nothing would ever be quite the same again. Daniel Reyes stood on an observation deck one evening, looking out at the quiet stars beyond the planet's orbit, watching a small human patrol ship escort a Kaldrinic diplomatic shuttle safely out of the system. It was a small, simple scene, nothing dramatic or impressive to look at, yet it represented everything humanity had worked toward for 200 years. He thought back over everything that had happened, the mining ship's accidental discovery, The tense first meetings, the failed probe, and the moment an entire battle fleet found itself surrounded without ever seeing the ships responsible until humanity chose to be seen. None of it had required a single act of aggression from humanity's side. Patience, careful preparation, and the discipline to wait for the right moment had done more than any show of force ever could have. The sector was no longer listed as empty in anyone's records. It never truly had been. Daniel allowed himself a small, quiet smile as the patrol ship completed its escort and turned back toward home, knowing that whatever came next, humanity would face it the same way it always had, watching closely, moving carefully, and choosing its own moment to be known.